Hello, welcome to another edition of Labor's Worldview TV. I'm your host, David Johnson, here with my co-host,
Jim Eyeman, and it's good to be back again, David. Thank you for inviting me to talk about one of my favorite subjects, electoral politics, if you want to call it that, and what's happened to the debates and what's happening to the election.
Well, Jim, I mean, this is nothing new, really. I mean, this has been going on a long time as far as elections in this country. We could go into some of the historical aspects of it, like, for instance, Eugene Debs running for president, I believe it was twice. Once from federal prison in Atlanta, in which he received 2 million votes. Is that correct?
It was in 1916, was when he was thrown into jail. And he got over a million write-in votes for president. He was a household name in the United States. And as was in the 30s, John L. Lewis, who the left, mainly the Communist Party, but other left groups were trying to have him build a Labor Party in America. That was our last best chance in the 30s. I don't think we'll ever see it again now. But yeah, Debs, well, my favorite son of Indiana.
Yes, and Eugene...
I've got some great quotes, since we're talking about Republicans and Democrats today. And in the 1920 election, Eugene Debs said, you don't have to say a man is a prostitute. You don't have to say they're an opportunist. All you have to do is say he's a Democrat. Okay. And this was Debs, who ran and was as a Democrat in Indiana and did one term as a state rep. So he knew how corrupt it was then and wanted no part of it.
Yes, and for the viewers who aren't aware, Eugene Debs was the national president of the Railroad Workers Union back when there was actually one Railroad Workers Union, as opposed to the broken up quilt that exists today, as far as different trades having their own unions within the same industry, that is the railroad industry. And Eugene Debs was also the leader of the Pullman strike in Chicago, which was a monumental strike in U.S. labor history. And Eugene Debs, like Jim said, got fed up with the corruption of the two-party system, particularly the Democratic Party, and decided to run as a socialist candidate was that the 1920 election, Jim?
Well, the 1916 one and the 1920.
And the 1920.
Those were his two. He was imprisoned because of his opposition to the military draft.
During World War I?
During World War I. So the great liberal Democratic president, Woodrow Wilson, besides, after World War I, conducting the Palmer raids, also threw the leading third-party candidate into prison for no other reason than that. So, I mean, this goes back a long time. Now, Debs, when he was president of the ARU, the American Railway Union, that was the first industrial union in America. And wasn't the IWW, but Debs did join it.
Debs was at the founding convention, yes,
yeah,
and it was
we're talking the 19th century here, where craft unionism was over. It was one industry. You know, if you were black, white, Latino, whatever, you know, you were a member of the union. So if you were a Gandhi dancer or an engineer, whatever. So that was one of the high points of American labor history, and thank you for bringing up the ARU. It was very important.
But then after that, of course, it was broken up into all these different unions within the railroad industry. And of course, that doesn't help working people. I mean, that just benefits the bosses, because then they can sort of employ a divide and conquer strategy.
Oh, you're absolutely right. When I joined, when I started on the railroad in 1965, I joined the Switchmen's Union of North America, which was a rival to the Brotherhood of Railway Trainmen. And the Switchmen's Union of North America, the SU of NA, was the only craft union that had rank and file ratification of contracts, election of national officers, regional officers, as well as local officers. The trainmen did not. So when the United Transportation Union was formed, None of our delegates were seated at the convention. The Credentials Committee just threw us out.
Yes, and so now moving forward a little bit in history, I guess the next milestone in third-party candidate running would be Henry Wallace in I think that was in 1948, 47.
Yes. Wallace was Roosevelt's vice president. He was an agronomist and an inventor. Marvelous man. So the plot by the Democratic Party at this time was to keep Wallace from becoming president because they knew that FDR was most likely not going to live through his fourth term. So they put in Harry Truman knowing that he was a cold warrior, which Wallace wasn't, and neither was FDR. But for whatever reason, because he was sick, and he went along with Truman, and it really ticked Wallace off, so he ran as an independent, yeah. People's Party, People's Progressive Party, whatever, yeah.
And then in more recent history, I guess the next kind of big milestone of a third-party candidacy would be the 2000 election with Ralph Nader of the Green Party. We remember that quite well, don't we, Jim?
Yeah, we do. At that time, I was the co-headquarters chairman of the Nader for President here in Champaign-Urbana. Our office was over there. It was really amazing. I went to Chicago for a big rally, and Michael Moore was there, and Studs Terkel, and Phil Donahue, and it was really something. Afterwards, I was very close to Ralph when he was being interviewed by one of the TV stations in Chicago, and he was asked what he was going to do about U.S. foreign policy, and he answered in 4 different languages. I thought that was so great, but.
Yes, and again, the reason that Ralph Nader ran as a Green and why he had such a large number of people supporting him, and from everywhere from well-known people like Jim mentioned to a lot of people throughout the country, was that, again, going back to Eugene Debs, to Henry Wallace, and then Ralph Nader more recently, is because the Democratic Party was selling out the average person, the average working person, and this was done out of frustration because of the Democratic Party being controlled by special corporate interests, corporate interests. Now, of course, after Al Gore pretty much capitulated in the stolen 2000 election, and George Bush was not elected but appointed by the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Of course, then all these Democratic all the way from officials to regular people that vote Democratic were trying to blame anybody who supported Ralph Nader as creating the presidency of George Bush. Well, this is just another typical divide and conquer strategy. The point is that the reason so many people supported Nader was because of the policies the Clinton-Gore administration did. I mean, let's remember, folks. I mean, we've been on a downhill trajectory since the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, and when Clinton Gore got elected in 1992, everyone thought finally, after 12 years of oppressive Republican rule, we're finally going to start to take back what was lost and get the country back on the right track for the majority of working people. But that's not what happened. What happened, Jim?
What happened was Newt Gingrich and the Republicans were all over everything Clinton did. He did some good things, but he also did some really bad things. For example, under his watch, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act took place, which opened up all this corruption between the banks. It brought down the country because it wasn't in place, where you had investment banks and commercial banks separated. Now they could all be all in one bank. So it was an extremely important bill, and it should be restored. And who will do that? I don't know. I don't think either Obama or Mitt Romney will. I mean, there's very little difference between them. A little bit on domestic things, same-sex marriage and abortion and whatever. But these are all appealing to the bases of their party rather than themselves. I mean, They are so close. Instead of shaking hands in the debates, they should have just kissed each other. I mean, it would have been so gay if they had, and honest. Yeah, no, I actually met Bill Clinton when he was when I worked in Arkansas when he was governor, and I liked the guy. He was very charismatic, and I congratulated him on being the last holding out on the full crew on the railroad for as long as he did. He says, Jim, there's only 4 unions in the state of Arkansas, you know, and. But he went from being a liberal Democrat to a neoliberal once he was president, and it wasn't the same man anymore. And I got a real kick out of John Ford, Black Agenda report last weekend, saying that Bill Clinton is now the viceroy of Haiti. Because he basically controls everything that goes on there,
Yes, I mean, let's not forget Bill Clinton, besides doing away with the Glass-Steagall Act, which led to the financial crash in 2008, Bill Clinton also pushed for and was successful in passing the North Atlantic Free Trade Organization, otherwise known as NAFTA, which has resulted in the loss of tens of millions of good-paying, mostly union jobs in this country. And making it Bill Clinton made it easier for companies to offshore their operations in Mexico or China. In fact, even giving them a tax break and seminars sponsored by the Department of Commerce. Bill Clinton also repealed the actually passed the Telecommunications Act, which made it easier for corporate mergers in news media. And it's just Bill Clinton did probably almost as much damage as 8 years of Ronald Reagan and 4 years of Herbert Walker Bush. Okay, so I mean, this is why so many people wanted to support Ralph Nader, because they saw that the Democratic Party had completely capitulated and sold out on all their principles, all their promises made to working people, and it actually had caused more damage in some ways than any Republican president could ever have. So then we fast forward to, of course, George Bush stole the 2000 elections, and then again in 2004 with rigged voting machines in Ohio that tipped the election. And this time John Kerry, who promised he wouldn't capitulate like Gore, who basically ran a half-meager, about a week court battle or so. Well, John Kerry, after making that promise, capitulated within hours. And it took Ralph Nader and the Green Party, as well as the Libertarian Party, to file a lawsuit was challenging the election results of that presidential election in 2004 because of the irregularities, to put it mildly, in Ohio. So anyway, then we fast forward here to Barack Obama's 2008 campaign after 8 disastrous years of George Bush. And remember all those slogans back then, Jim? Let's see. Hope.
We can believe
change. Yes. Change we can believe in. And all the promises Barack Obama made, I mean, there's a long list. Let's see. He was going to close Guantanamo. He was going to repeal NAFTA. He was going to support the Employee Free Choice Act. He was going to end the wars, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there was a lot of other promises made. And, I correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but he didn't keep a single promise. Not one single promise I'm aware of that he made to working people.
Okay, well, error number 1, if it was an error and not a conscious decision, was in 2008 the Senate rules should have been changed so you didn't have didn't take a super majority, which it does now, in order to get something passed. So they just have this automatic veto, well, what do you call it? Well, it's an automatic vote. It just says no. Filibuster. It's an electronic filibuster, rather than people actually standing up and speaking like they used to in a filibuster. But it's just sad that everything moves to the right, and it's been going. Even Carter started some of this at the end of his term.
As far as the deregulation of the trucking industry and the airlines.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Although I'll give Carter credit for being the last one to use the Sherman Antitrust Act when he broke up Mont Bell. But the Sherman Antitrust Act has never been used. It could be used immeasurably today. All kinds of cases. The monopolies of the air should be just, broken up. But no. The Republicans aren't going to do it, and the Democrats aren't going to do it. And we see every time the Republican Party moves to the right, the Democratic Party moves to the right. Now, today, we have the DREAM Act never was even attempted to be passed in any serious way, but Obama instead adopted Marco Rubio's plan, which is, it's identical. And then Marco Rubio had to distance himself to the right of his own plan, and then we see with Obamacare is nothing more than Mitney care, Romney care in Massachusetts, and it aids all the, it doesn't aid the doctors so much as it does the insurance companies. It's a windfall for insurance. So, I mean, what are we doing? Every time we make a move further and further and further to the right. And this is why it is so important that while we still can vote, you know, if it's not, if it's counted, is to vote for a third party, Dave.
Well, okay, then we have also the whole thing of corporate money, because I mean, if you really, well, corporate money and corporate control of the media, to me, those are the two major pillars of the ruling class use to support their current power structure, their oligarchy. But Jim, I'll tell you what, I'd like to go now to a short clip. It's actually an animation clip that was done quite a few years ago, and it's narrated by Kiefer Sutherland, and initially he opens it up, and it's the actual narration of the actual animation is done by Kiefer Sutherland's grandfather, Tommy Douglas, who was the man responsible for bringing national health care to Canada. And the name of the film is Mouseland, and sort of the general theme of it is, why do mice keep voting for cats? So take a look at this clip, and we'll be right back.
It's the story of a place called Mouseland. Mouseland was a place where all the little mice lived and played, and were born and died, and they lived much as you and I do. They even had a parliament, and every 4 years they had an election. They used to walk to the polls and cast their ballot. Some of them even got a ride to the polls. Got a ride for the next 4 years afterwards, too. Just like you and me. And every time on election day, all the little mice used to go to the ballot box, and they used to elect a government. A government made up of big, fat, black cats. Now, if you think it's strange that mice should elect a government made up of cats, you just look at the history of Canada for the last 90 years, and maybe you'll see that they weren't any stupider than we are. Now, I'm not saying anything against the cats. They were nice fellows. They conducted the government with dignity. They passed good laws. That is, laws that were good for cats. But the laws that were good for cats weren't very good for mice. One of the laws said that mouse holes had to be big enough so a cat could get his paw in. Another law said that mice could only travel at certain speeds so that a cat could get his breakfast without too much physical effort. All the laws were good laws for cats. But oh, they were hard on the mice. And life was getting harder and harder. And when the mice couldn't put up with it anymore, they decided something had to be done about it. So they went en masse to the polls. They voted the black cats out. And they put in the white cat. The white cat had put up a terrific campaign. They said all that Mouseland needs is more vision. They said the trouble with Mouseland is those round mouse holes we've got. If you put us in, we'll establish square mouse holes. And they did. And the square mouse holes were twice as big as the round mouse holes. And now the cat could get both his paws in. And life was tougher than ever. And when they couldn't take that anymore, they voted the white cats out and put the black ones in again. And then they went back to the white cats, and then to the black cats. They even tried half black cats and half white cats. And they called that coalition. They even got one government made up of cats with spots on them. They were cats that tried to make a noise like a mouse, but they ate like a cat. You see, my friends, the trouble wasn't with the color of the cat. The trouble was that they were cats. And because they were cats, they naturally looked after cats instead of mice. Presently, there came along one little mouse who had an idea. My friends, watch out for the little fellow with an idea. And he said to the other mice, look, fellas, why do we keep on electing a government made up of cats? Why don't we elect a government made up of mice? Oh, they said he's a Bolshevik. Lock him up. So they put him in jail. But I want to remind you that you can lock up a mouse or a man, but you can't lock up an idea.
As my grandfather would have wanted, the message of Mouseland is for all the people of Canada. We hope you have enjoyed this production, and we hope that it has left you with something to think about. Thanks to this short film, I think that Tommy Douglas's words have as much life and meaning today as when he first spoke them. Thank you very much for joining me.
Okay, we're back. I hope you enjoyed that production of Mouseland. And why do mice keep voting for cats, Jim?
Well, okay, it's like, the difference here for the people, I think, is like how excited we get about, we're like lemmings, and just how excited we are to run to the edge of the cliff before we run off. I mean, we're people, we're not sheeple, but they treat us that way, and we sometimes act that way by voting for things that we don't want. Debs, I think in the 1916 election, said it's better to vote for something you want and not get it than it is to vote for something you don't want and get it.
Yes.
You know, and it's principled here to vote for a third party, because you're not going to get what you want by voting for a Republican or a Democrat. Frankly, I've never voted for either. I've been a lifelong socialist since I was in high school. But it's too bad there's not a socialist party or a socialist candidate or a revolutionary social democratic candidate running. But perhaps there will be in the future. But it isn't the vote so much as it is here. It's a matter of keeping ballot status for the Green Party. You know, I consider myself more or less left of the Green Party, but I supported Ralph Nader, and I've allied myself with the Greens in the past. I think you have too, David. Mm-hmm. And it's very important to keep that ballot status, because it's getting to be almost impossible to get. Now, there was also another one in other states is Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party, who's very strong. And Frank, I don't see any difference between Rocky and Jill at all in the alternative debates. I've even voted for a libertarian rather than in the past, rather than vote for a Republican or a Democrat.
Yes, well, I don't have the same past experience as you, Jim. My family, going back to probably before FDR, well, actually probably around that time of FDR, were, staunch Democrats. And the reason they were staunch Democrats because my family was very much involved in the labor movement. My grandmother was a union activist. My father was president of the local carpenters union for a number of years. And they loved FDR and everything was accomplished. But, we got to remember something. All these good things that came out of the FDR administration during the 1930s and into the mid-40s, Social Security, workman's compensation, unemployment insurance, the 8-hour workday, overtime pay. I mean, this was not done out of the kindness of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's heart. You got to understand what was going on at that time, as we've shown many times on various segments of Labor's Worldview. The country was in political turmoil, as well as, mainly economic turmoil, which then produced, of course, political turmoil as well because of the crash, the stock market crash of 1929 and the subsequent depression. And what's really scary is we've got very similar conditions now that existed right before the crash in 1929. There was the wealthy controlled vast amounts of the distribution of wealth. In other words, they owned probably 90% of the wealth. 1% owned 90% of the wealth. And then the Depression came and people were in abject poverty. So Roosevelt did this because the country was on the verge of a revolution. I mean, you had 3 general strikes in 3 major cities in 1934 alone. 1934 is a very pivotal year. Besides these 3 general strikes in San Francisco, Minneapolis, and Toledo, you also had large numbers of textile strikes going on in the South, and it was also the height of the rural crime wave. John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, and it was interesting because the reason those bank robbers were so successful is because the majority of the rural people thought they were folk heroes because they were robbing the banks that, in many cases, stole their farms because of the economic depression. So Roosevelt was smart enough to know that something had to be done. But, in essence, the reason he did it was because of the vast mobilization of the labor movement and other movements out there, okay? So, but nevertheless, my family came out of that era and that tradition of voting for Democrats, and I was that way too. Now, after Bill Clinton got elected in 1992, he ran in 96 for re-election, I just could not stomach voting for this man who brought on about NAFTA that's cost all these tens of millions of U.S. jobs and the other lies and betrayals he did that adversely affected working people. So I've started looking for other alternatives. I mean, I was not just a Democratic voter, I was a Democratic campaigner. I went out and campaigned for local, state, and national candidates, putting up yard signs, organizing phone banks. I mean, all sorts of things I did to help get Democrats elected. And by 96, I was just getting a very sour taste in my mouth about the whole Democratic Party because I saw it wasn't just one candidate. I saw that it was a systemic problem throughout the whole party, from the local level on up to the national level. So by 2000, I was ready for someone like Ralph Nader, and I had just had enough of the lies and betrayal of the Democratic Party that was basically doing the bidding of corporate interests.
Well, let's look at the betrayal of the recall election of Scott Walker in Wisconsin. The Koch brothers immediately started funneling millions of dollars to stop the recall from going through, and they were working ads all the way up until Election Day. The Democratic National Committee didn't throw any money at it whatsoever, or very little. Bill Clinton came in, and blah, blah, blah. And you might say that the replacement, the mayor of Milwaukee, was no Frank Zeidler. And since I've mentioned Frank Zeidler, he was the socialist mayor of Milwaukee when I was in high school. And when we did the show on the history of socialism in Milwaukee, Dave,
yes,
you asked me, well, what did Frank do? And I said, well, if I remember, I said, well, he couldn't do a lot because he didn't have any socialists on the city council. Well, that isn't true, and I made an error there. What's true is that Frank built the the Mitchell Park domes. He expanded the park system enormously. It was the least corrupt city in America, and we miss it. And the whole socialist tradition in Milwaukee has just vanished. I mean, except a few old timers that still remember it. And it's just everything's been a lot of things. What Frank did has been privatized now. It's been taken away from the public and by land grabbers. And this goes on, and there's no resistance. And it just boggles my mind sometimes why people allow this to happen. They think it's in their best interest. They buy the jargon of the Democrats and the Republicans and believe it to be true. So it's heart-wrenching, and yet I have to have some hope. But I notice in the debates, nobody was talking about climate change, except Romney said something about cap and trade, carbon. So, all right, now they're privatizing carbon. Oh, this is going to do a lot of good here.
Yes, I mean, now, Frank Seiler was mayor of Milwaukee for 50 years, wasn't he? He got elected back in the 1930s?
No. It was after the war.
Oh, in the 40s? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but there was a socialist mayor and a majority socialist city council for a number of years in Milwaukee. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct. In fact, you could say that socialism was born, modern American socialism was born in Milwaukee with the Social Democratic Party of Milwaukee. And,
well, that's a fact you don't hear about in the corporate media. And I think that's a large problem of it, Jim. Besides the corporate money basically bribing our elected officials, I think the other thing is the almost total control by the corporate interests of our media. Now, there are exceptions, of course, like public access TV, like Urbana Public Television. There's also community radio stations, like locally with WFT and also WRFU, part of the Independent Media Center. But for the most part, most people aren't even aware these media outlets exist, much less watch them. I mean, most people out there in America watch Fox, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, NBC, and to some extent PBS. And even PBS, which is the public broadcasting system, is used to be funded by taxpayer money and was very independent and objective. But over the years, it was defunded, and the PBS had to start relying more and more on corporate money. And you could tell the quality of their programming changed from objectivity to corporate propaganda, to put it in a nutshell. So here we are. I mean, this is the situation we're in. Most people working people I talk to out there, Jim, they're not happy with the way things are. They know they're getting screwed. The problem is they don't know what to do about it. Because here's the thing. The two-party systems, even though they're supposed to be so diametrically opposed to each other, really serve the same masters, and they're quite good at masters at dividing us. I mean, with the Republicans, their greatest thing is the gun issue. They have convinced a lot of working class, mainly men, some women, but mainly men, to vote Republican because they say the Democrats are going to take their guns. On the other side, you have the abortion issue, in which many of the Democratic Party uses that to scare women, to say that, oh, if the Republicans elected, then Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned, and the whole system of back alley abortion is going to come back to us, in which many women were butchered and died as a result of this. These are what's been called identity politics or wedge issues. It's amazing how well it works, Jim. I mean, that's what most people, the reasons they vote the way they do is out of fear. Fear of the other candidate, what's crazy about it is that the other candidate is, regardless of who's elected as a president at this point in time, they serve the same corporate masters, and they're going to do the same policies regardless. A good case in point is Jeffrey Sachs, who's from Counterpunch magazine, did a study which showed that the Romney-Ryan proposed budget for cutting Social Security and Medicare is identical to the Obama plan to cut Social Security and Medicare if he's reelected.
Yeah, this is really something. You know, in 1911, the deaf, dumb, and blind genius Helen Keller became a socialist, and she said, the difference between the Republicans and Democrats is like the difference between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. But the way it's going now, I actually like Gore Vidal's statement that we don't have two parties in America. We have one party, the property party, with two right wings. And too bad he's gone. He died here recently, but I think you hit the nail right on the head, David.
You know, Jim, it's amazing. I mean, many people we both know. I've gotten into some very heated discussions, even debates, and almost to the point of arguments with them. Is that they think that they have to vote for Obama because if Romney's elected, it's going to be the end of the world for labor. Well, you know,
what are we, 6.5%?
They even characterized Obama. Get this, Jim. They even one group of friends of mine characterized Obama as left of center. What do you think of that characteristic?
I think that it's ignorant and or stupid, you know, because he's not. You know, if anything, he's a moderate Republican, and I wouldn't know that I'd even give him that much credit, to be honest with you. But oh yeah, if you attack, the big one is if you criticize Obama for all of his failures and everything, you're a racist. That's the new one. See. Well, that one doesn't fly either, but it's a problem of getting our head around the fact that we have to come together in some kind of organization and fight back. You know, Mother Jones said once, you know, you don't have to have the vote to raise hell. Well, we want to vote and raise hell too. You can't just vote without raising hell the rest of the year. You know, it's going to take activism. And at some point, people are going to get fed up and something's going to happen. And if the left, if the People's and Workers movement doesn't do it, then there's going to be a fascist movement that will.
You know, Jim, that brings a good point too, is, I mean, during Weimar Germany, the period between after the First World War, in which there was democracy in Germany, you know, it failed. And the reason it failed and the Nazis were able to eventually grab power was the fact that they completely abandoned working class issues. And I see the same thing happening here. Chris Hedges has an excellent book called The Death of the Liberal Class, and I'm currently reading it right now, and it's pretty frightening, the parallels. He goes back all the way to World War I with Woodrow Wilson, as you mentioned before, about how he was able to use propaganda and public relations to basically sell the war to the American, entry into World War I to the American people, because prior to their propaganda and public relations campaign, over 70% of the American people wanted nothing to do with the war in Europe, which started in 1914. Within less than 6 months, they completely flipped that around. You know, this is the thing is that, you know, as we've gotten more and more sophisticated media over the years, you know, after 1917, of course, eventually radio came about. And then we had, of course, television, and then we had cable and satellite television. Now, of course, we have the internet. Well, really, the internet is probably, you know, probably one of the best places you can go to get the truth. And they're trying to put controls on that.
Sure.
But if you depend on corporate media news, you're going to be very much misinformed and even disinformed. But anyway, I want to get to a point about this election, about the alternatives. You mentioned Rocky Anderson earlier. You know, all the third-party candidates have been banned from even participating in the presidential debates. Now, it used to be that the legal women voters used to run the debates. And that happened, and then in, what year was it, Jim? I think sometime in, was it the 88 election or 92 election, the National Democratic Party and the National Republican Party got together and formed a private corporation, and they're hosting the debates, which then, because they're a private corporation, it gives them the right to exclude anybody they want. In other words, it's just the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate that gets to debate. Of course, they get all sorts of corporate sponsors for this, which buys, you know, airtime with the corporate media, and there you go. And this is supposed to be a choice, basically Coke and Pepsi, and that's the only two drinks out there.
Well, this is why many of our viewers today haven't heard or seen or have even heard the name Jill Stein or Rocky Anderson. What is happening is that you go into the booth never having heard of these candidates, and that includes NPR. If anything, they're almost as bad on this as Fox is. If there's anything good on PBS, they put it on the overnight, like Frontline. Oh, you either have to be able to record it, but you're not going to get it on prime time, or Independent Lens. It's always on the overnight. So it's gotten pretty weird. Now, what I would say about tell your friends. I mean, it's even hard for us to get Jill Stein literature here. I got one thing I picked up in Berkeley, California when I was on
Jim,
the
you had to
train.
go all the way to Berkeley, California to get a piece of Jill Stein
That's
literature?
right. It was that bad,
Wow.
see?
You know,
And,
that's interesting you mentioned that because, you know, this is a really nice, concise pamphlet here, and on the back, it states her issues. But I love this, this one is Take Back Our Future from Wall Street, unbought. And it says Jill Stein for president, the Green Party of the United States, unbought, principled, independent, standing up for working people. Nice slogans. Anyway, it's really interesting if you compare what both Rocky Anderson and Jill Stein have to say about issues the other two candidates won't even discuss. I mean, the bank bailouts, the plight of working people, and
poverty,
climate change,
poverty.
They don't even mention this. And of course, that's also the function of the Commission on Presidential Debates, is not only to bar candidates like Jill Stein, who, by the way, was arrested along with her running mate for trying to enter the presidential debates. It was back about a couple weeks ago. Both of them were taken to jail and handcuffed to a chair for 8 hours. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's what they're, I mean, you think about it, common criminals are treated better than that. But they wanted to make an example of them. But this is what we've come to in America, people. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you know, Jill Stein, the Green Party, they basically have a program to where they're going to put they want to put Americans back to work, to actually start doing green jobs. In other words, really expanding the government support of alternative energy, wind, solar, and other alternative energies, and plus, do work what we desperately need on infrastructure that's fallen apart in this country. Also advocating starting a high-speed rail system. I mean, other politicians give lip service to this, but they don't actually have a program to put people back to work like FDR did in the 30s, which is also going to be focused on actually getting alternative energy to be much more common as opposed to the periphery that it is now.
Well, we're supposedly going to get a high-speed rail from Chicago to St. Louis, Amtrak, and it's going to be 125 miles an hour. In 1936, the Milwaukee Road from Chicago to Milwaukee had one slow order, slow to 100 miles an hour over the EG&E crossing at Rondout, Illinois. I mean, we were at the cutting edge of railroad technology internationally in the 1930s. And we can't even, and they're thinking, wow, 125 miles an hour. In Germany, in Japan, they're going double that speed.
Yes, that's true, Jim. I mean, there's been an actual concerted effort to stop alternative energy and high-speed trains by various corporate interests for decades now. But anyway, she goes on here to say, in the bailouts, they gave $12 trillion in cash and free loans to the big banks. Yeah, $12 trillion. I mean, that figure, I was shocked at that. I mean, of course, this is not being reported in the corporate media. She also wants to forgive student loan debt and create free higher education tuition. In other words, that all the universities would be free as long as you have the grades like exists in most European countries and even some Latin American countries. She also wants to create health care as a human right by expanding Medicare to cover every single man, woman, and child in this country, and at the same time, actually reduce our health care costs, which are the highest in the industrialized world. Yet we have 40,000 people die every year from unnecessarily because of untreated health problems, because they have no insurance. Our infant mortality rate in this country is comparable to some third world countries. I mean, it's just it's a shocker. In the wars for oil, of course, having a green economy and putting the people to work that they're unemployed to create this would stop that. And what's also interesting, she advocates the legalization of marijuana as a way of not just for tax revenues and another green industry of another type, but to also help in the drug war violence, because like prohibition in the 1920s, it didn't work, and it resulted in a lot of people getting killed in wars over money and turf.
They really don't care about that, Dave. All they want is the money. Violence, fine. This is imperialism's way of population control. Are things like war and the war on drugs, which is, just basically another way of foreign aid to Colombia and to Mexico. Give them drugs. I mean, the FBI did this, in the ghettos during the 60s. They made drugs real cheap. Heroin, you could buy real cheap, you know. It was, and the Black Panthers knew this, you know, and they warned about this. And I mean, they will do anything to keep state power and to keep the working class poor. And we're getting poorer, and it's not going to stop unless we stop them, David.
Yes, and last but not least, she advocates repealing the Patriot Act and restoring our freedoms and constitutional rights that have been eroded by not just the Patriot Act, but also the National Defense Authorization Act, which is pretty scary stuff if you look at it. Also, we got a Democratic candidate running for Congress in this area, Jim, who his name is David Gill. And he seems to be doing a lot of interesting things that's not typical of a Democratic candidate. I mean, the biggest one is he's an emergency room doctor from Clinton, Illinois, and he's a staunch advocate of expanding the Medicare program to include every man, woman, and child in this country. But what's really interesting about him, besides that position and his opposition to wants to renegotiate NAFTA and the other corporate trade treaties that have lost us, you know, tens of millions of jobs in this country, but he has refused to take any corporate money whatsoever. And when he ran in the Democratic primary, I know the Democratic National Committee didn't support him; they were supporting his opponent, and he still won. So I mean, he's doing all the right things, and he looks like an unusual Democrat for a change. But I just want, you know, the thing is, the only way we're going to be able to tell is if he does get elected and see what he does in his first 2 years of Congress.
Yes, well, vote wherever you want locally. I'm not going to advocate anyone myself. As a socialist, I just don't vote for Democrats or Republicans. But yeah, vote for them if you want. You could do worse, I guess, but don't get your hopes up.
Well, Jim, I guess, you know, that gets into another topic, which probably could make a whole other show, is what strategies we need to do to try to take back control. Now, elections is just one tool in the toolbox, if you will. I mean, it's no substitute for mass mobilization in the streets or in other types of organizing like the Occupy movement did. But nevertheless, I guess we kind of want to wrap this up because we want to show you a film segment of Jill Stein, an interview with Real TV. Anyway, any last comments, Jim?
No, not really. It's just a shame that the public can't see the third-party candidates debate. You know, Al Jazeera did one in Chicago, but it's...
Who hosted that? Was it Larry King?
Yeah, Larry King was the host.
Okay.
So it was at the Hilton in Chicago.
Okay.
So if you don't get free speech TV, you have to have satellite to do that. You're certainly not going to see anything on Comcast. Don't get me started here.
Except they're banning public television, of course.
Right, and they're trying to get rid of it too, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
they want to get rid of this public access.
We can't let that happen. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Labor's Worldview TV. And Jim, I'm glad to have you back and everything. And it's real pleasure having you back because it always makes a lively program one way or another. So until next week for another edition of Labor's Worldview, be safe and power to the people.
My guest today is Jill Stein, nominee for President of the United States with the Green Party. Thank you very much for joining me, Dr. Stein.
It's great to be with you guys.
Really, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming. I read you said you'd be the underdog candidate for the underdog voters. Who are these underdog voters?
It's certainly most of the American public. People are losing their jobs, wages are declining. Millions have lost their home. Another million are in the pipeline to lose their homes this year. The cost of health care is skyrocketing. Public higher education is increasingly out of reach. We have 36 million young people who are students or recent graduates who are effectively indentured servants because they don't have the jobs or the wages to repay these unforgiving debts. And the political establishment is not doing anything about it, while a very small segment of the American population, the 1% we say, is making out like bandits. So neither party is fixing this.
I just want to make this clear. You're going to be on ballots, but not in all states. Can you explain what is it in the system in the U.S. that makes it so hard for a third party to break into this two-horse race?
Exactly. The American system is designed to eliminate political opposition, like some of the dictatorships that we criticize that have rigged political systems. In many ways, the American system is also rigged, but in ways that are not as straightforward. So you have to actually see what it takes to get on the ballot if you're not already on as one of the big machine parties. Each state has its own set of rules, which are very demanding, very detailed and bureaucratic, and require lots of signatures in order to get on the ballot. So for the most part, you need a lot of money, many millions of dollars, to buy your way onto the ballot, basically by hiring signature gatherers and people to keep track of this.
It just seems the money is too powerful here in Washington. Is there a way you see to go against money, the power of money?
Absolutely. I mean, the voters don't like this. The voters repeatedly are calling for getting big money out of politics. In my home state in Massachusetts, we passed a law to get the big money out. We, the voters,
the Supreme Court passed another law which just lifts all limits from contributions into political
And what
campaigns.
I was going to add was that in our state, when we passed it by voter referendum, the legislature, which was 85% Democratic Party, they repealed it. So the entrenched system is very hostile to the needs of the American people.
The Green Party often described itself as the party that represents Main Street versus Wall Street, as you've just been saying. In what way do Barack Obama and Mitt Romney represent Wall Street that is against the interests of the American people?
Mitt Romney doesn't really pretend even to do anything other than advance the economic elite's agenda. He has a track record, which is to advance the likes of his own, to acquire enormous amounts of wealth by tearing down other companies and businesses and firing workers and offshoring jobs and gobbling up the profits himself. So he's got a track record which is pretty clear, and he's pretty much straight ahead Wall Street agenda. With Barack Obama and the Democratic Party, it's a little harder to see clearly what they're about, because they do talk a populist line, but to actually look at their record, it's pretty clear who their allegiances are to. So George Bush provided about $800 billion in bailouts for Wall Street, but under Barack Obama, it's been many trillions, some $4.5 trillion worth of bailout that has already been dispersed, and then there are many more trillions worth of loans and emergency loans and guarantees, and then quantitative easing through the Fed, and all kinds of backdoors to basically funnel either out-and-out bailouts or free money to Wall Street. So Mitt Romney is Wall Street. He's the wolf in a wolf's clothing. Barack Obama is the wolf in a sheep's clothing, but they both essentially have the same agenda.
Dr. Stein, can you talk a little bit more about your involvement with the Occupy movement? Has the movement been big enough to make a sort of a tectonic shift in U.S. politics?
I believe that tectonic shift is happening, and Occupy is one of the indicators that it is happening. And it's happening because 1 out of every 2 Americans is now either in poverty or low income. Americans are really hurting and are desperate for solutions which they are not getting. So there is a rebellion that is in full swing. Occupy speaks for that rebellion. We saw in polls early on that a majority of Americans, a substantial majority of Americans, was very sympathetic and supportive of the agenda that Occupy was articulating.
But with the majority, it's kind of a silent rebellion, right?
Exactly. We are silenced. You know, I believe it is not silent, but our voices are continually muzzled through all kinds of ways. We can't speak out politically. The media is very much in the hands of big corporations.
The Congress approval rating is 11%, so it is, people are unhappy, but it's a silent
by design,
protest.
Right. So that people have to work very hard to break through. And Occupy got to critical mass by assembling, you know, in our public squares. And they were very effective in breaking through until the public relations campaign began to be conducted against them. And we saw that because that PR campaign actually got leaked. It was a many hundreds of thousands of dollars campaign that was constructed even before the counterattack began. So you had both a media counterattack and then you had a counterattack by way of police brutality and the suppression of our civil liberties as people were brutally attacked.
Let's talk foreign policy. Let's switch gears. For many years now, probably since the collapse of the Soviet Union, every U.S. president, every administration took the idea of the U.S. being the world police sort of to the next level. Mm-hmm. President Obama was no exception. What is it the basis of this world police policy as you see it, and would you carry on with it as a president?
This world police policy is bankrupting Americans. We're spending about $1 trillion a year on the military industrial security complex. That budget has roughly doubled over the last 10 years, and we are certainly not more secure for it. We spent trillions of dollars in Iraq. When we withdrew from Iraq, how did we do it? We withdrew from Iraq in the dead of night at a secret undisclosed date because we were afraid that we would be ambushed in the process. How many friends exactly did we make in this war? What kind of a stable democracy did we make in Iraq? You know, Iraq continues to teeter on the brink of a civil war. It has certainly not become a staunch and reliable ally for the United States or for democracy or for women's rights, for that matter. The barrel of a gun has not been an effective diplomat, and we need to heed that and take a lesson from it. Unfortunately, President Obama basically embraced George Bush's, militaristic approach to foreign policy. On his third day in office, he intensified the bombing in Pakistan, then went on to spread the drone wars into Somalia and into Yemen. He surged the troops into Afghanistan. We still have about twice as many troops as we had under George Bush. It has certainly not made Afghanistan a safer, more secure place. We are not in a better position to, withdraw now and declare victory than we were, years ago. We know that when you have the kind of civilian casualties that you have with drone bombing, for example, that you simply aid and abet those very terrorist organizations that you are trying to go after in the first place.
What is it that makes you concerned with regards to Mitt Romney's foreign policy plans, if anything?
His plans are basically, let's increase the military budget, he has a lot of sort of machismo and bravado, and he beats the war drum. He wants to, really flex muscle against Iran. But, so too does the Obama administration, though they're a little bit more, they're less warmongering about it. But they're basically in agreement about coming down very hard on Iran and holding no options off the table. So they both threaten to use war where we should be using diplomacy.
We talked about money in politics, and everyone knows campaigns are not cheap. You're a physician. Your net worth is probably far from Mitt Romney's $200 million. Your party is financing a lost cause, basically, at this stage. What is the goal, the real goal at this stage?
In my view, to say it's a lost cause is to say that our economy is a lost cause, you know, is to say that it's inevitable that we're going to crash. And so
I don't
let me
mean
just,
that.
okay.
I mean the elections.
I would agree. I mean, I think that the uphill battle for our election is identical to the uphill battle to rescue our economy. We are a real political party. You know, we're not just you know, the storefront that looks like it's Main Street but is actually funded by Wall Street. That's what the other political parties are. They pretend to really have public support, but what they really have is the support of the 1%, and then they have a propaganda campaign going on, and intensive public relations and psychological warfare that's intended to convince people that they don't have any options.
Dr. Stein, thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
It's great talking with you.